Welcome to AudioCert, where the official study guides are brought to life. Welcome, savvy learners, to another exciting deep dive. Today, we're cracking open a crucial module from the EC Council Certified Ethical Hacker, or CEHv13 official study guides. We're talking about Module 7, Malware Threats. It's a topic that really touches everyone, doesn't it? From the most seasoned tech professional to, well, anyone just trying to stay safe online. Because honestly, who hasn't bumped into some kind of malware at some point?
Indeed. Malware isn't just a buzzword anymore. It's a dynamic and constantly evolving adversary. Understanding its mechanisms, how it infiltrates systems, how it adapts, it's absolutely foundational for anyone looking to secure digital environments. So our mission today is really to equip you, our listener, with a comprehensive understanding of malware, what it is, how it works, and maybe most importantly, how to defend against it. Think of this as your essential shortcut to being truly well-informed on one of cybersecurity's most persistent challenges.
Absolutely. And we're not just going to throw facts at you. We're going to unpack the why and the how behind these threats. We'll sprinkle in some real-world examples, try to give you those aha moments. So whether you're prepping for your CEH exam, catching up on the latest in cyber defense, or just, insanely curious about the digital underworld, buckle up. Let's get started on this deep dive into malware threats.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Before we even get into the nitty-gritty of what malware does, how does it even get onto our systems in the first place? It can sometimes feel like it just magically appears, or like it's riding in on a Trojan horse, almost literally.
Right. It often seems that way. But you're right, there are distinct pathways, and many of them cleverly leverage human behavior or system automation. Let's look at some common entry points, maybe starting with one that might surprise a few people. First up, instant messenger, or IM applications. You might think twice about opening an email attachment from someone you don't know.
Yeah, okay. Definitely. But files from contacts on, say, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, LinkedIn Messenger, maybe Instagram Direct Messenger, they often get a free pass. The risk there, well, it's infection by a Trojan. You just can't be 100% sure who's really at the other end. Like, imagine Bob sends you a file. You trust Bob, so naturally you open it. But what if an attacker has actually hacked Bob's Messenger ID and password? Now they're using Bob's trusted identity to spread Trojans to his entire contact list, and suddenly you're the next victim. It's a classic social engineering trick, exploiting the very trust we rely on in our digital chats.
So it's not just about what the file is, but who you think sent it. Wow, that's really sneaky. What about more physical ways for infection, like things you can actually hold?
Good question. Beyond the online trickery, sometimes the simplest, most physical interactions can be the most dangerous. Think about those USB drives you find, or maybe get from a friend. Portable hardware media, or removable devices like USB flash drives and memory cards, they're classic malware injection vectors. One simple way is just direct physical access. If someone, let's call him Bob again, can access Alice's system when she's not there, he can easily copy a Trojan from his USB onto her hard drive. Simple as that.
Right, just walk up and plug it in.
Exactly. But even more insidious is Windows auto-run functionality. You might also hear it called autoplay or auto-start. If that's enabled, this feature automatically runs an executable file when a USB or memory card is connected.
Oh, I remember that being annoying sometimes.
It can be more than annoying. Attackers exploit it by placing an autorun.nf file along with malware on a device. That .nf file is basically a simple instruction file. For example, it might just contain a line like opensetup.exe. That tells your computer to automatically run the hidden malware, disguised maybe as setup.exe. Yeah. To mitigate this, especially in, say, Windows 11, you really should turn off auto-start functionality. You can usually do this through the group policy editor. Type gpatit.msc in the Start search box, navigate through computer configuration, administrative templates, Windows components, autoplay policies, and then just double-click Turn off autoplay. It's a simple step, but it can save you from a whole lot of trouble.
That auto-run feature sounds like a convenience that really turned into a major security hole. What other seemingly innocent software interactions can invite malware in?
You hit on a key point there. Seemingly innocent. Rogue or decoy applications fall right into this category. Attackers lure victims with free applications that promise, all these extensive features. Often, they sound too good to be true.
Like those free PDF editors or something?
Exactly. Or maybe a program claiming features like an address book, access to several POP3, that's Post Office Protocol version 3 accounts, and more. users get tempted. Now, the critical point here is if a victim downloads these free programs and then labels them as trusted in their security settings.
Oh, okay.
If they do that, the antivirus software might just fail to detect the new malicious software hiding inside. And the result, the attacker starts receiving sensitive information, email passwords, POP3 account passwords, cached passwords, even keystrokes, all without being noticed.
Wow. Just by marking it trusted.
And another vector, often overlooked maybe in personal settings, but really critical in organizations, is open file sharing. If ports like NetBIOS, that's port 139, or FTP on port 21, or SMB on port 145, if those are open on a system for file sharing or remote execution, well, attackers can use them. They can access the system, install malware, modify files. They might even launch a denial of service, or DOS, attack just to force a system reboot.
Why force a reboot?
So the Trojan they installed can restart itself immediately, ensuring persistence.
Clever.
The mitigation, thankfully, is pretty straightforward. Disable file sharing if you don't absolutely need it. You can usually find that in your control panel under Network and Sharing Center settings.
Okay, so whether it's through a dodgy USB drive or a compromised chat, it seems like a big part of the challenge is that malware is often introduced by us rather than just spontaneously appearing. But can malware itself be a conduit for more malware, like one infection leading to another?
Absolutely. That's a more sophisticated and very common tactic. Installation by other malware. A piece of malware that has command and control C2 capabilities can often reconnect back to the operator's site. It might use common browsing protocols like HTTP or HTTPS to blend in. This allows malware that's already inside the network to receive both new software payloads and commands from the attacker outside. So in these cases, one piece of malware installed on a system can actually drive the installation of additional malware across the network. It leads to cascading damage. It's kind of like establishing a digital beachhead for further attacks.
Right, the first one opens the door for its buddies.
Precisely.
Okay, so that's how it physically gets in, or maybe through some seemingly innocent interactions. What about when we're just browsing online? The internet feels like a minefield sometimes. Are there common tricks attackers use to distribute malware just on the web?
You're right, the web is prime hunting ground, and attackers employ some pretty sophisticated tactics to, blend in or just outright deceive people. One prevalent method is black hat search engine optimization, or SEO.
Ah, the dark side of SEO.
Exactly. This refers to unethical SEO tactics used specifically to manipulate search engine rankings. Attackers use things like keyword stuffing, inserting doorway pages, page swapping, adding unrelated keywords, all to push their malware-laden pages higher up in search results. They want to make them appear legitimate, so when you search for something innocuous, their malicious page might be the first result you click.
So they're not just hoping you stumble upon their trap. They're actively engineering the search results to put it right in front of you. Nasty. What about when you're already on a page, though?
That's where things like social engineered clickjacking come into play. This is all about tricking users into clicking something they believe is harmless. Maybe a button, an image, a link. Malware is injected into what looks like a legitimate website element. When a user clicks it, the embedded malware executes without their knowledge or consent. It's silent, hidden activation.
Like clicking play on a video that isn't really a video.
Could be, yeah, or a fake download button. We also see a lot of malvertising. That's malicious advertising. Malware-laden ads get embedded in legitimate online advertising channels, so you might be on a reputable news site, see a seemingly harmless ad, click it, and bam, you're infected. It cleverly leverages the trust you naturally place in the website you're visiting.
Because you trust the site, you implicitly trust the ads on it.
Right. And similarly, compromised legitimate websites are a major threat vector. Attackers actually take over reputable websites, maybe through a vulnerability in the site's software. Then when an unsuspecting user like you visits that compromised but legitimate site,
you think you're safe.
Exactly. But you unknowingly install malware on your system just by browsing the page. This is often called a drive-by download. Simply visiting the page can lead to infection, sometimes without any explicit click or action from the user at all.
Wow, a drive-by download? That's scary. No clicking needed.
It really is. It's a powerful combination they use. Manipulating search, tricking clicks, compromising trusted sites. It seems like the common thread in nearly all these initial infection vectors is either exploiting human trust or leveraging system automation, often through these seemingly innocuous interactions.
Yeah, that's a potent mix for attackers. That's a lot of ways for things to go wrong. So once malware gets in, what are these digital invaders actually trying to achieve? What's their core identity, their goal, if you will?
That's a really great question because their goals fundamentally dictate their methods. Malware authors create these programs with specific components, specific tools really, to achieve various malicious objectives. Their goals commonly include things like stealing information, deleting data, changing system settings, providing unauthorized remote access, or sometimes just multiplying and occupying space to disrupt systems.
Just causing chaos.
Sometimes, yeah. A key characteristic, though, across most types, is that malware is designed to propagate, to spread, and to function secretly. It wants to remain hidden for as long as possible to maximize its impact before it's detected.
Fascinating. And within this broad category of malware, we often hear about potentially unwanted applications or PUAs. What's the deal with those? They sound less overtly malicious, maybe, but still troublesome.
You're right to distinguish them. PUAs, or potentially unwanted applications, are often not outright viruses or Trojans in the traditional sense, but they definitely perform actions that users typically wouldn't want, and often without really clear consent. We can break them down a bit. First, there are marketing PUAs. These applications basically monitor your online activities. They collect browser details, information about your personal interests based on where you browse. Then they send this data off to third-party app owners,
Who then use it to target ads at me.
Precisely. They use it to market products and resources based on those interests. It's essentially an invasion of privacy for commercial gain, and it's often bundled sneakily with other free software you thought you wanted.
Right, the hidden extra you didn't ask for.
Then there are crypto mining PUAs. These exploit your computer's resources directly for financial gain for the attacker. Crypto mining PUAs use your system's processing power, your CPU, maybe your GPU, to perform the digital mining of cryptocurrencies, things like Bitcoin, Monero, often without you even knowing it's happening.
So they're literally stealing my computer's energy and processing power to make money for someone else.
Yeah.
That's like an invisible drain.
Exactly. It leads to degraded system performance, your fan might spin up constantly, your energy bills might go up, and it ultimately causes wear and tear on your hardware.
Wow. Okay, and then there's adware, which feels like something we all encounter at some point. What exactly is it, and how do you know if you're infected?
Adware is indeed a common nuisance, yeah. But it can also be a gateway to more serious infections sometimes. Adware typically needs an internet connection to run, and it's specifically designed just to display advertisements to the user. This can show up as like extra toolbars on your desktop or maybe injected into your web browser.
Those annoying pop-ups that won't close?
Those are a classic sign, yes. Functionality-wise, adware might promise things like advanced search features, better bookmark organization, or free games. But the real purpose is relentlessly displaying ads. There are some clear indications you might have an adware infection. One common sign is frequent system lag. If your system takes noticeably longer than usual to respond, adware could be consuming processor speed and memory, degrading performance.
Okay.
The most obvious sign, of course, is being inundated with advertisements. You'll just be flooded with unsolicited ads and pop-ups while browsing. And like you said, they can be really challenging to close, often leading to malicious redirections if you accidentally click the wrong spot.
Yeah, the fake X button trick.
Exactly. And in severe cases, you might experience incessant system crashes. Your system may crash or freeze constantly, maybe even occasionally showing the dreaded blue screen of death, the BSOD. These are all pretty clear red flags that something is seriously wrong.
That's definitely a clear sign if your system starts acting like that. Okay, now shifting gears a bit from the broadly annoying to the deeply insidious. Let's talk about advanced persistent threats, or APTs. This sounds like a much more serious long-term game.
It absolutely is. APTs represent a significantly higher level of threat. They are typically highly organized, often state-sponsored or well-funded criminal groups, and their aim is long-term infiltration, espionage, data theft, not just quick hits. An APT attack is meticulously planned and executed, usually with prior knowledge of the target network. This helps them remain undetected for a very long time. They aren't opportunistic like some malware. They are strategic.
So what makes them stand out? What are their key features?
Well, key characteristics of APTs include their high risk tolerance. They are designed to stay hidden inside a network for extended periods, sometimes months, even years, extracting data slowly and carefully to avoid tripping alarms. They rely heavily on the use of advanced techniques. deploying sophisticated methods and custom malware to infiltrate networks, evade detection, establish persistence. This often includes things like spear phishing, exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities. Those are flaws in software that even the vendor doesn't know about yet, and using rootkits to hide their presence deep in the system.
0 days. Wow.
Yeah. And finally, they usually rely on a complex command and control, or C2 infrastructure. APTs use these sophisticated networks of C2 servers to communicate with the systems they've compromised, to receive stolen data, and to send further instructions or updated malware. This C2 infrastructure is typically redundant and heavily obfuscated to protect it against takedown attempts by law enforcement or security companies.
So these aren't just one-off attacks. They're more like a stealthy, long-term espionage campaign planned and executed with significant resources.
Yeah.
What are the key stages in such a sophisticated attack? How does it unfold?
We can generally break down the APT lifecycle into a few distinct phases. It often starts with an expansion phase. This is where the attackers gain initial access, maybe through spear phishing or exploiting a vulnerability. Then they identify key systems for persistence, and they start leveraging those compromised systems to move laterally within the network, gaining more access.
Spreading out quietly.
Exactly. Then comes the persistence phase, which is absolutely crucial for an APT. This involves maintaining that long-term access to the target systems, actively evading endpoint security like intrusion detection systems, IDS, and firewalls. They want to remain hidden until their objectives, maybe stealing specific intellectual property or monitoring communications, are met. And the final stage is a cleanup phase. Once their mission is complete, or if they fear detection, the attackers try to prevent discovery and meticulously remove evidence of their compromise. This can involve deleting logs, removing their tools, and sometimes even manipulating data or file timestamps to mislead security analysts, making the system appear as it was before the compromise, effectively erasing their tracks.
That really paints a picture of a patient, methodical, and very careful adversary. It highlights that the goal here isn't just a quick smash and grab, but long-term covert access.
That's the essence of an APT, yes.
That's a pretty chilling picture of APTs. Let's zoom in now on one of the oldest, most recognized, and arguably most deceptive types of malware, the Trojan horse. We've all heard the story of the wooden horse at Troy, right? But what's its digital equivalent actually doing?
The analogy is really perfect. A Trojan, in the digital sense, is a malicious program that's disguised as something benign or useful, something you might actually want to run. Users unwittingly install it, thinking it's, I don't know, a game, a utility, a document viewer, and once it's inside, it unleashes its true destructive purpose. Unlike a virus, it doesn't self-replicate. It relies entirely on that initial deception to trick a user into executing it.
So it needs me to click on it, basically.
Generally, yes. Trojans typically work at the same level of privileges as you, the victim user. So if you, as a standard user, can delete files, transmit information online, or install other programs, so can the Trojan running under your account. It might then try to exploit vulnerabilities to escalate its privileges to get more control than you normally have. A compromised system can then affect other systems on the same network, especially if things like authentication credentials are being transmitted in clear text somewhere. Trojans typically get onto systems via email attachments, malicious downloads from websites, and sometimes through those instant messages we talked about earlier. They play on human curiosity or trust.
So it's essentially a wolf in sheep's clothing, gaining access under false pretenses. What are some of the most obvious signs that maybe a Trojan has made its way into your system? What weird things might happen?
Yeah, there are several computer malfunctions that can be pretty strong indicators of a Trojan attack. For instance, if your computer screen suddenly starts blinking erratically or maybe flips upside down or the colors get inverted, that's a significant red flag.
Definitely weird.
Right. You might also notice the default background or wallpaper settings changing automatically, maybe using pictures from your own computer or even an image planted by the attacker. Printers automatically starting to print documents without any user input, that's another one. Or web pages suddenly opening on their own. And maybe most critically, if your antivirus program seems to be automatically disabled, or if you find data being corrupted, altered, or deleted without you doing anything, these are all pretty clear indications you might be dealing with a Trojan.
That's quite a list of digital mischief. It sounds like Trojans are extremely versatile then. What are hackers actually trying to do with them?
They use Trojans for a really wide array of malicious purposes, often falling into a few main categories. First, system control and disruption. Trojans can cripple your computer by deleting or replacing critical operating system files. They can also create backdoors to gain remote access, allowing attackers to come and go as they please. Or they might even turn your PC into part of a botnet, using it to perform distributed denial-of-service DDoS attacks against other targets.
Using my computer to attack someone else.
Exactly. Second, information theft. Trojans are excellent at stealing sensitive information. This includes things like credit card details, account data, email passwords, web service passwords, maybe important company projects or documents. They often achieve this using keyloggers, which secretly record everything you type.
Oh, nasty.
And third, Trojans often serve as a delivery mechanism for other types of malware. They might be the initial way in, the foothold, that then allows other, maybe more specialized malware like viruses, worms, or spyware to be downloaded and installed. They maximize the impact of that initial breach.
So they're the delivery van for even worse stuff sometimes.
You could think of it that way, yeah.
You mentioned earlier they often listen for connections. Are there specific, like, digital doorways or ports they commonly use that we should be aware of?
Yes. Understanding the common ports used by Trojans is really critical for detection and analysis. Ports, represent the entry and exit points for data traffic within the operating system. And many Trojans exploit specific application or process-specific ports to establish their hidden communication channels back to the attacker. The listening state is particularly important here. This is when a system or a program on the system waits to accept an incoming connection from another system on a specific port. Whenever a system reboots, Trojans often try to move into this listening state. Some might use more than one port, maybe one for listening for initial commands, and others for transferring stolen data. Knowing some common ports can be a quick indicator for a security analyst looking at network traffic. For example, port 555 is often associated with Trojans like Innikiller and Stealth Spy. Port 1243 is famously used by older versions of the Sub-7 Trojan. Port 8080, which is also a common port for web proxies, is unfortunately exploited by Trojans like Zeus and some associated with APT 37. And port 31338, that number might look familiar to some, it's 0x7A6A in hexadecimal, is often associated with DPO, a variant of the notorious back orifice Trojan. Recognizing unusual traffic on these ports can be crucial in identifying a potential compromise.
That's really helpful, especially understanding the listening state concept. Knowing those port numbers could be a quick flag for an analyst. Now, you briefly mentioned there are many types of Trojans. Can you walk us through some of the most significant categories? What makes each one unique?
Certainly. Trojans are generally categorized by their specific functionality and their intended targets, offering attackers various means to compromise a system. First, we have remote access Trojans, or RITs. These are probably what many people think of first. Their purpose is to provide attackers with full remote control over the victim's system. This allows remote access to files, private conversations, accounting data, webcam, microphone, basically anything. The RIT software acts as a server on the victim's machine, listening on a specific port, often one that's not typically exposed directly to the internet.
So how did the attacker connect then?
Well, if the victim is behind a firewall, a remote attacker might struggle to connect in. But attackers within the same network, perhaps behind the same firewall, could potentially access it more easily. Or, more commonly, they use what's called a reverse connecting Trojan. To illustrate, imagine Jason, an attacker, wants Rebecca's data. He manages to infect your computer with his RAT's server.exe. This Trojan is configured to connect out from Rebecca's computer back to Jason's server, often over a common port like 80 HTTP or 443 HTTPS to bypass firewalls. This establishes a reverse connection, giving Jason complete control of Rebecca's machine from the outside. NJRA is a well-known example, often used for logging keystrokes and stealing browser credentials.
Okay, so it calls home instead of waiting for a call.
Exactly. Next are e-banking Trojans. As the name suggests, these specifically target users of online banking and payment system to steal financial information. They work in several ways. A TAN grabber, for instance, intercepts transaction authentication numbers, those single-use passwords some banks use. The Trojan might intercept the real TAN, send a fake random number to the user, which the bank rejects. And then the attacker uses the stolen valid TAN with the victim's login details to make fraudulent transactions.
Wow.
Other methods include simple keylogging, capturing data entered into web forms, inserting fake fields into legitimate banking pages, taking screen captures or videos, mimicking financial websites entirely, or performing man-in-the-middle attacks. A notable example is CEHv13. It's a sophisticated banking Trojan that uses techniques like DLL sideloading to execute. It can freeze the victim's screen while capturing keystrokes in the background, or generate deceptive pop-ups asking for login details or confidential information again.
That sounds terrifyingly effective for stealing banking info.
They can be, yes. Then there are point-of-sale, or POS, Trojans. These target POS systems, the payment terminals, credit and debit card readers you see in stores. Their goal is to grab sensitive credit card information right as it's swiped or inserted. They compromise these POS devices to acquire TRIFA1 and TRACK-A2 magnetic stripe data. That data includes the credit card number, the cardholder's name, expiration date, and sometimes the CVV. This gives the attacker basically everything they need to clone the card or use it for online fraud. These have a huge impact on retail businesses.
Yeah, you hear about those big retail breaches.
Often, POS Trojans are involved. And finally, let's mention backdoor Trojans. These programs are designed specifically to bypass standard system authentication or security mechanisms like intrusion detection systems, IDS, or firewalls without being detected. They provide stealthy, uninterrupted access. Their installation is usually done without the user's knowledge, giving the attacker ongoing freedom to transfer files, modify or corrupt data, install more software, or even reboot the machine. They are often used in more targeted attacks, sometimes to group victim computers together into botnets for larger-scale operations.
So what's the main difference between an RAT and a backdoor Trojan then? They sound similar.
That's a good question. The main difference is often in the interface. A RAT typically has a user interface, a client component that the attacker uses to easily issue commands and see the results. A traditional backdoor often doesn't have that fancy interface. It's more focused on providing persistent, stealthy command line access or a hidden communication channel. But the lines can blur sometimes.
Okay, that makes sense. RATs are more interactive. Backdoors are more about stealthy access. That's an eye-opening tour of Trojan functionalities. It's clear that deception is absolutely key. So once an attacker has chosen their specific type of Trojan, how do they actually get it onto the victim's machine? What are the common delivery mechanisms we should watch out for?
Right. The delivery mechanisms are as varied as the Trojans themselves, and they often rely heavily on social engineering or exploiting known vulnerabilities. The process usually starts with the attacker creating their Trojan packet, maybe using specialized tools like NJR that we mentioned. Then they need to get it to the victim. They often employ a dropper or a downloader. A dropper is a small initial program whose only job is to install the main malware component. A downloader is similar, but it fetches the main malware payload from a remote server first, then installs it. These help get the Trojan package onto the victim's machine.
So like a small scout that brings in the main army.
Kind of, yeah. Attackers also frequently use wrappers, sometimes called binders or glueware. These tools bind several executable files together into a single file. So when the victim runs the file, it might visibly run a legitimate program, maybe a game or a utility, while silently running the Trojan executable in the background. This often exploits the lure of free software. For instance, a Trojan might arrive disguised as a free computer calculator attached to an email. When the user installs this seemingly harmless application, the Trojan installs itself quietly in the background, maybe starting to delete files or email sensitive information out.
The old free software trick.
It's very common. Or maybe an attacker sends a fake birthday greeting executable. The user runs it, watches a little dancing birthday cake animation on the screen, while in the background, a Trojan is being installed. Deploying a Trojan through emails directly is also prevalent. The attacker sets up a Trojan server, then sends an email with maybe a malicious link or attachment designed to lure the victim into clicking. If the victim clicks the link, their device might connect directly to the attacker's Trojan server. The server then sends the Trojan malware down to the victim's system for automatic installation, establishing that hidden connection back to the attacker.
Okay.
And finally, deploying a Trojan through USB or flash drives is a classic, simple but still effective tactic. Attackers transfer the Trojan onto a USB drive. They might then trick the victim into using it. Hey, can you print this file for me? Or they might simply drop the USB drive in a public place, like a parking lot or an office lobby.
Hoping someone picks it up out of curiosity.
Exactly. Waiting for a curious individual to pick it up and insert it into their system. Once it's inserted, especially if autorun is enabled, the Trojan can propagate using that dropper-downloader method and automatically execute, infecting the system and potentially spreading across the network.
So whether it's through these deceptive files, tricky emails, or even just finding a lost USB drive, Trojans really rely on that initial act of human trust or curiosity to get their foot in the door.
That's right. That makes them incredibly effective and difficult to guard against without constant vigilance and user awareness.
Okay, we've navigated the treacherous world of Trojans, where deception is really the core strategy. Now let's pivot to another infamous category, viruses and worms. What makes a computer virus different from what we've just discussed with Trojans, and why are they still such a persistent threat after all these years?
The key difference with viruses lies in their ability to self-replicate and spread by attaching themselves to other programs. They are essentially parasitic. They need a host program to function and propagate. So a computer virus is technically a self-replicating program that attaches copies of itself to other executable code, and it operates typically without the user's direct knowledge or consent after the initial infection.
Like a biological virus infecting a cell.
Exactly. The analogy holds pretty well. It's contagious in the digital sense, contaminating other files. However, unlike a biological virus spreading through the air, a computer virus typically needs some form of human assistance, meaning a user running an infected file or program to initially get onto a machine or spread to external machines. Once it's in, though, it tries to replicate.
How does that replication actually work? What's the cycle?
The typical virus infection cycle works something like this. First, the virus code, which is attached to a legitimate host program, gets loaded into the system's memory when that host program is run. Then the virus code activates and starts checking for other suitable executable files on the disk. When it finds one, it appends or prepends its own malicious code to that legitimate program, infecting it. Later, when a user, unaware, launches this newly infected program, the cycle repeats. The virus code in that program executes, finds more programs to infect, and so on. This cycle continues, spreading the infection across the system until hopefully an anomaly is detected by security software or the user notices strange behavior. The critical point here is that the user unknowingly triggers and executes the virus, at least initially, for it to function and start spreading.
Okay, so it needs to ride along with something else, like you said, parasitic, which makes it feel like it has this kind of almost symbiotic relationship with legitimate files, but a malicious one. How do they actually manage to spread and get into systems in the first place?
Viruses spread in various ways, but they all require that initial entry into the system. Once a virus-infected file is downloaded and installed or executed from any source, it tries to replicate. Popular spread methods include, obviously, infected files themselves. Viruses can infect a wide variety of file types, not just executables sometimes. File sharing services can be a problem, exploiting file servers to infect files that unsuspecting users then download and open. USB and other storage media are still common. Inserting an infected flash drive into a clean system is a classic way to spread.
Still dropping those USBs in parking lots.
It still happens. And of course, malicious email attachments and downloads opening attachments or downloading apps from untrusted sources is a huge vector. Even just network access sometimes. Connecting to an untrusted Wi-Fi network or maybe permitting openly accessed file sharing programs on your machine can potentially allow a virus to get in.
Wow, okay. That's an incredible range of tactics they use to spread. What are the different types of viruses out there? How do their methods vary?
You're right, they attach to a host, and their diversity really reflects the attacker's creativity in exploiting different parts of a system. First, let's talk about macroviruses. These primarily infect applications that use macros, like Microsoft Word or Excel. They work by embedding malicious code within the macro language, usually Visual Basic for Applications, or VBA. When the application triggers the macro, like opening or closing a document, the virus code executes. They often infect document templates or convert infected documents into template files, all while maintaining the document's normal appearance. They exploit that sometimes blurry line between data files and executable code.
So opening a Word doc could actually infect you.
If it contains a malicious macro and macros are enabled, yes, absolutely. Then we have polymorphic viruses. These are particularly tricky. They are programmed to constantly change their own executable code. They mutate every time they replicate. They do this while still retaining their original malicious functionality. The goal is to make them extremely difficult to detect using traditional signature-based antivirus software because their signature keeps changing.
How do they manage that?
They typically have three main components: the encrypted virus code itself, a decryptor routine, and a mutation engine. When an infected program runs, the decryptor routine takes control, decrypts the main virus code and the mutation engine. The virus then does its work, finds a new program to infect, makes a copy of itself and the mutation engine in memory. Then it instructs the mutation engine to create a new, slightly different randomized decryptor routine. This new routine, along with a newly encrypted version of the virus code and the mutation engine, gets appended to the new victim program. The cycle continues. The result is that no two infections look exactly alike at the code level, making them very hard for scanners relying on fixed patterns to identify.
So if I'm getting this right, a polymorphic virus is essentially like a master of disguise,
Hmm.
constantly changing its clothing, its code to avoid being recognized, even though it's still the same underlying person or malicious function doing the bad stuff.
That's a perfect analogy, exactly. And taking that concept even a step further, we have metamorphic viruses. These are even more sophisticated. Instead of just encrypting themselves differently, they actually rewrite their entire code completely each time they infect a new executable file.
Wow, rewrite the whole thing.
Yes, they use complex metamorphic engines to essentially reprogram their own code. The code might be translated into a temporary intermediate representation, modified, and then converted back into a new variant of the virus. The new code will have the same malicious algorithm or function, but the actual instruction sequences will be different. This method avoids pattern recognition almost entirely. They are generally considered even more effective and harder to detect than polymorphic viruses because there's no stable core code to even try and find.
That's incredible, constantly rewriting itself.
It's a significant challenge for defenders. Finally, let's touch on logic bombs and time bombs. We mentioned these briefly with Trojans, but they can be implemented as viruses too. These are pieces of malware designed to lie dormant and wait for a specific condition or a specific date and time to execute their malicious payload. A logic bomb triggers when a certain logical condition is met. For example, maybe it activates only if a specific file is deleted, or perhaps, like you suggested, if you visit a particular banking website, it then triggers a keylogger component to steal your credentials. A time bomb is essentially just a logic bomb where the trigger condition is a specific date or time, like April Fool's Day, Friday the 13th, or maybe a specific anniversary.
So these aren't just immediate threats. They can lie dormant, like a ticking time bomb, literally waiting for just the right moment. That's truly chilling. But, sometimes the threat isn't a real virus at all. Sometimes it's just a hoax or maybe a fake tool trying to scare you. How do we spot those fakes?
That's a very important distinction to make because fear itself can be a powerful tool for attackers. Virus hoaxes are basically false alarms about non-existent viruses. They often spread rapidly via email chains or social media posts, causing unnecessary panic and sometimes leading people to take harmful actions, like deleting important system files they're told are viruses.
Like those old chain emails warning about the good times virus.
Exactly like that. To identify hoaxes, the best advice is always to be skeptical. Cross-check any alarming information you see from suspicious sources, like random social media posts or forwarded emails with reputable sources. Go to the websites of well-known antivirus software vendors. They almost always have dedicated pages debunking common hoaxes. Just search for the supposed virus name there.
Okay, check reliable sources. Makes sense.
Then there are fake antivirus tools, which are arguably more dangerous than hoaxes. These are actual malicious programs that masquerade as legitimate antivirus software. They might look very convincing. Typically, they run a fake scan, report a bunch of non-existent threats, display alarming but fake scan results, and then demand payment from you to remove these imaginary threats.
So they scare you into paying them.
Precisely. And the impact is serious. While you're trying to pay them, they might steal your credit card details or other sensitive information. Sometimes the fake AV tool itself contains other malware that corrupts your files or installs backdoors. This trend is particularly rampant in the mobile app space now. For example, one study by AV Comparatives found that something like 2/3 of the antivirus apps they tested in the Android Play Store were actually fake or ineffective. They prey directly on your desire for security, making you pay for a problem they either invented or grossly exaggerate.
Wow, 2/3. That's a clever and nasty trick preying on people's security fears. Speaking of demanding payment, that brings us directly to ransomware, which has become such a major headline grabber in recent years. What exactly is it, and how does it work?
Ransomware is a particularly destructive and, unfortunately, very profitable form of malware for attackers. Its core function is to hold your data hostage. It typically encrypts the files on a victim's machine, documents, photos, databases, everything making them completely inaccessible. It then prevents you from accessing your data and displays a message demanding a ransom payment, usually in cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, to make tracing harder, in exchange for the decryption key needed to get your files back.
So they lock up your stuff and make you pay to get it back.
That's the essence of it, yes. A prominent and very prolific example is the STOPDJVU ransomware family. It was first identified back in February 2018, and since then it has evolved into literally hundreds, maybe over 600 different variants. This ransomware is known for being highly sophisticated. It uses several layers of obfuscation to hide its code and employs strong RSA encryption for the files, which makes decryption without the key practically impossible and slows down analysis by researchers. It commonly targets Windows operating systems. Once a system is infected, it typically downloads other malicious components to encrypt essentially all user files it can find on the system.
And how do you know what's happened?
The encrypted files get unique, often seemingly random file extensions appended to them, different for each variant, like .lui, .book, .new, .cdxx, etc. And crucially, after encrypting the files, a ransom note file, usually named something like readme.txt, appears on the desktop or in folders. This note contains instructions telling the victim how to contact the attackers, often via email or a specific website, and how to pay the ransom to supposedly get their files back.
And how does something like SDOPDJVU usually spread?
Its primary tactics historically have involved spam emails carrying malicious attachments, like infected documents or zip files, and also masquerading as legitimate software installers or cracks, often distributed on pirate torrent websites.
That's a terrifyingly comprehensive attack chain for ransomware. Lock up data, demand crypto.
Yeah.
It highlights the sheer level of criminal sophistication involved now. Now let's talk about worms. They're often mentioned in the same breath as viruses, but what really sets them apart?
The distinction between a worm and a virus is actually quite crucial, though they share the replication aspect. While both replicate, worms are entirely self-contained and self-propagating. This makes them potentially much faster at spreading across networks. So computer worms are standalone malicious programs. They can independently replicate, execute, and spread across network connections without needing any human interaction after the initial infection.
No clicking needed to spread.
Generally, no. Once a worm infects one machine on a network, it actively scans for other vulnerable machines on that same network and attempts to copy itself to them, often by exploiting software vulnerabilities or weak credentials. Their impact can be significant. Some worms are designed simply to consume available computing resources, bandwidth, processing power, overloading network servers, web servers, and individual systems, potentially causing them to stop responding or crash. Think of a denial of service effect caused by replication. Other worms carry a destructive payload, similar to a virus or Trojan, designed to damage the host system after spreading.
So they're like viruses but don't need a host file and can spread on their own.
Exactly. Worms are sometimes considered a subtype of virus because they replicate, but their key difference is they don't require a host program to attach to. They are standalone executables. Attackers also frequently use worm payloads to install backdoors on the systems they infect. This turns the infected computers into zombies, which can then be controlled remotely as part of a botnet. These botnets, built by worms, are then used for launching further cyber attacks like large-scale distributed denial of service, DDoS attacks, sending spam, or mining cryptocurrency. Some of the more recent worms analysts have seen include names like SSH Snake and Raspberry Robin.
You mentioned earlier, I think, that worms might be generally easier to remove than viruses, which seems a bit counterintuitive given how fast they can spread. Can you unpack that a bit? Why might that be the case?
That's a great observation. It does sound counterintuitive at first. The reason worms can be easier to remove once they're identified on a specific machine is precisely because they are standalone programs. Remember, a virus needs to attach itself to a legitimate host file. Removing the virus code without damaging or deleting the legitimate host program can sometimes be tricky. You might have to disinfect the file or restore it from backup. Worms, however, don't need a host. They exist as independent files or processes. This means that once security software identifies the worm's specific executable file or running process, it can often be quarantined or deleted directly without impacting critical system files or other legitimate programs.
So it's cleaner to remove because it's not tangled up with something else.
Exactly. The challenge, as you rightly noted, is their rapid autonomous spread across the network. So while removing it from one machine might be straightforward, eradicating it from an entire network quickly before it spreads further is the hard part. Initial containment is much harder with worms due to their speed.
Okay, so the distinction is in their dependency or lack thereof on other files. That makes perfect sense now.
Right. So in essence, the core difference comes down to replication and spread. A worm replicates on its own without needing to attach to other programs, and it actively spreads itself through networks, often much faster than a virus, which typically relies on users moving infected files around.
Okay, we've seen how versatile traditional malware like Trojans, viruses, and worms can be. But, cybersecurity is this constantly evolving landscape. Things keep changing. What happens when malware doesn't even leave a traditional file on your disk? That sounds like. Well, like a ghost in the machine. How does that work?
It truly is like chasing a ghost sometimes. Fileless malware represents a really significant challenge for defenders, precisely because it operates in memory or leverages legitimate system tools, leaving very few, if any, traditional forensic artifacts behind on the disk. It's basically malicious software that does not rely on conventional file-based components, like .exe files stored on the hard drive, to achieve its objectives. Instead, it operates directly in the system's RAM, or maybe within the Windows registry, or it executes its malicious commands through legitimate, trusted system tools like PowerShell or WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation. This makes it incredibly difficult for traditional file-scanning antivirus solutions to detect.
So it lives in the computer's short-term memory, not its long-term storage.
Often, yes, or it uses legitimate tools as puppets.
Mm.
Its infection methods are quite diverse as well. Attackers might create malicious websites that appear legitimate. When a victim visits, scripts on the page might scan the visitor's browser or plugins for vulnerabilities, and then run malicious code directly in the browser's memory space without ever saving a file. Another common technique involves registry manipulation. Malicious code or scripts can be injected directly into the Windows registry. Then, legitimate system processes can be tricked into reading and executing that code from the registry, effectively bypassing user account control, UAC prompts, and application whitelisting controls that might otherwise block unknown executables.
Hiding it in the system's own configuration database.
Clever.
Very. It can also potentially infect system firmware, the low-level code on hardware components like network cards, hard disks, or even the main system BIOS UEFI itself. Delivering malicious payloads from that level makes it incredibly persistent and stealthy.
That's incredibly sneaky. If there's no actual file to find, it feels like trying to catch smoke. Can you give us a real-world example of fileless malware in action? How would that look? Absolutely. A prime example that gained attention is Pilus. This is a Python-based fileless malware specifically designed to target cloud computing workloads. Its main purpose is to exploit the resources of cloud instances, think virtual servers used for storage or computation for long-term crypto mining. It does this by injecting XMRig, which is a popular miner for the Monero cryptocurrency, directly into the memory of the compromised Linux system.
Okay, so targeting cloud servers, not just desktops, and injecting into memory. How?
The attack often starts by finding publicly accessible Jupyter Notebook services. These are web-based interactive computing environments popular in data science if they're misconfigured with inadequate restrictions on executing system commands. Yeah. Attackers scan the internet for these misconfigured services. Once found, they typically use a command to download a malicious payload from a remote site and then inject it directly into the Python runtime memory, often using an HTTPS GET request specifically designed not to save the payload as a file on the disk first. The really clever technical trick here, particularly in Linux environments, involves a system mechanism called MEMFT that stands for Memory File Descriptor.
Memory file descriptor. What does that do?
Essentially, the initial Python script the attacker runs decodes and decompresses the actual XMROG miner payload, which might be hidden using base64 encoding and zlib compression. Then it uses a system call, memftcreate, to create a special kind of file descriptor that refers directly to a region of anonymous memory, not a file on disk. It writes the decoded malware content into this memory buffer. Then it executes the malware directly from this memory location using another system call like os.execl.
So it's basically tricking the operating system into treating a block of RAM as if it were an executable file on disk, but it never actually touches the disk.
Wow, that sounds incredibly difficult to spot. How do you even detect something like that if there are no files to scan?
That is precisely the challenge, and it's why defenders have to shift their focus. Researchers look for indicators of compromise, IOCs, that go beyond traditional file signatures. Even without a malware file on disk, there might be other clues. For instance, researchers might identify the CEHv13 hash of the initial loader script that performed the memory injection. Or they look for network-based IOCs like connections going out to known malicious crypto mining pool domains, like gulf.monerussian.stream in the Pilus case. Or the attacker's specific Monero wallet address that the miner is configured to send funds to. It forces defenders to rely much more heavily on behavioral detection, spotting anomalous process activity, unusual network connections, strange system calls, rather than just scanning files for known malicious patterns. That's a really stark reminder that we absolutely need to look beyond traditional files for threats these days.
Yeah.
And speaking of cutting edge, let's talk about something that feels almost straight out of science fiction. AI-based malware. This is where it gets really interesting, potentially scary. How is artificial intelligence changing the game for malware?
This is undoubtedly the next frontier, maybe even the current frontier, of cyber threats. Attackers are increasingly leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques to create far more sophisticated, adaptive, and autonomous malware. AI-based malware basically refers to malicious software that harnesses AI methodologies and algorithms to amplify its own functionalities and accomplish its goals more effectively. It's not just static code anymore, it's potentially learning code.
Learning code. What can it actually do differently?
Well, its key capabilities are really quite game-changing compared to traditional malware. It can potentially adapt its behavior and evasion techniques dynamically based on the specific security environment it finds itself in. It might analyze user behavior patterns or the technical controls like antivirus or firewalls present on a system to figure out how to bypass them more effectively. This allows it to launch highly targeted attacks, remain undetected for much longer periods, and potentially identify novel ways to access systems or move laterally across networks with greater precision. It essentially learns from its environment and its interactions, making it a much more dynamic and unpredictable threat than static malware.
So in essence, it's not just attacking, it's observing, learning, adapting its strategy, and then re-attacking, potentially creating a truly dynamic and resilient threat. Can you walk us through a life cycle of something potentially that intelligent?
Exactly. Its process flow could be thought of as an intelligent life cycle. 1. Infiltration. It first gains initial unauthorized access, maybe using traditional methods or AI-enhanced phishing. 2. Learning phase. Once inside, it starts collecting data about the system, the network environment, the security tools present, maybe even user activity patterns. It's learning the unique characteristics of its target. 3. Adaptation and evolution. Based on this learning, it then modifies its own code, its communication methods, or its attack strategies to be more effective and evasive in that specific environment. It essentially evolves into a more sophisticated form tailored to its victim. 4. Propagation and execution. Finally, it might spread to other systems using its adaptive techniques and executes its ultimate malicious actions, like data exfiltration or system disruption.
That sounds much harder to defend against. What signs might indicate you're dealing with something like this?
The indicators of AI-based malware can be very subtle, unfortunately. You might see unexpected spikes in data transfer, especially outbound traffic going to unusual destinations. Or perhaps new or unusual external network connections being established by seemingly legitimate processes. Also, obscure code executions happening purely in memory that are not saved to disk could be a sign, similar in principle to fileless malware, but perhaps driven by more adaptive logic. The biggest challenge here is its potential for dynamic evasion. If it can truly analyze system behavior patterns and dynamically modify its code or behavior to avoid signature-based or even simple behavior-based detections, it becomes incredibly difficult to catch using traditional methods.
That's a truly chilling development malware that learns, adapts, and maybe even generates convincing fake content to trick users. Can you walk us through a specific example? You mentioned fake GPT earlier.
Yes, fake GPT serves as a perfect illustration of how AI concepts, or at least the hype around AI, can be leveraged maliciously. It was identified in early 2023, clearly capitalizing on the immense popularity and buzz around OpenAI's ChatGPT. It was primarily distributed via a malicious Chrome browser extension, cleverly named something like Quick Access to ChatGPT. It promised users rapid access to what was actually a counterfeit ChatGPT service.
The Trojan horse approach again, disguised as a helpful tool.
Precisely. Its real objective was to compromise users' Facebook accounts and embed concealed backdoors. It would quietly install a malicious Facebook application backdoor, potentially granting the threat actors super admin rights over the victim's associated Facebook pages or business accounts.
Why target Facebook accounts specifically?
By gaining control over prominent Facebook business accounts, the attackers could build an army of Facebook bots and leverage Facebook's own advertising platform maliciously. This allowed them to disseminate paid Facebook ads, promoting their malicious extension further, using the victim's own advertising budgets and accounts to pay for it. It created this self-replicating worm-like propagation mechanism funded by its victims.
Wow, that's diabolical. Using the victim's money to spread itself further.
It's quite insidious. The attack phases are insightful, too. Initially, it propagated through these sponsored posts on Facebook, masquerading as that helpful ChatGPT utility. Unaware users install the extension. Once installed, the extension leveraged the user's authenticated browser session to interact with Facebook's Metagraph API, allowing it to perform actions on the user's behalf programmatically. It even manipulated Chrome's declarative NET request API, a feature meant for legitimate extensions, to modify network request headers, essentially tricking Facebook's servers into recognizing malicious requests as originating from legitimate sources. And crucially, the hijacked accounts were then used to create that army of Facebook bots, pushing out more sponsored posts, spreading the malware further, all while charging the original victims' accounts for the ad spend. It's a self-sustaining, financially motivated, deception-driven attack.
The sophistication of that is truly staggering. It learns user context, adapts its network requests, tricks security mechanisms, and self-propagates using its victim's own resources. It really hammers home that we're dealing with intelligent, evolving, and often financially motivated threats now.
Absolutely. The landscape is definitely shifting.
So after hearing about all that, especially the fileless and AI stuff, what does this all mean for us, the defenders?
Yeah.
The ethical hackers? With threats becoming so sophisticated, so stealthy, even intelligent, how do we possibly find and fight them? It feels like we need a whole new arsenal, a whole new approach.
You're absolutely right. The defense strategies must evolve constantly to try and keep pace with the threats. Our primary tools in this fight really boil down to two key areas: malware analysis and implementing robust countermeasures. The purpose of malware analysis is crucial. It's about gaining an in-depth understanding of each specific malware sample we encounter. This helps us identify emerging trends, find and fix existing infections within networks, and ultimately develop better defenses to thwart future attacks. Broadly, there are two main approaches to analyses. First is static malware analysis. This involves studying the malware code and structure without actually executing it. Second is dynamic malware analysis, where we study the malware by running it, but in a very carefully controlled and monitored environment, like isolated virtual machines or specialized sandboxes, specifically to observe its real-time behavior safely.
Okay, let's start with static analysis then, sort of dissecting the malware without letting it run wild and cause damage. What are the key techniques we use there? What can we learn just by looking at it?
Static analysis can give us a wealth of crucial clues before any potential damage occurs. First, a fundamental technique is fingerprinting. This involves generating unique hash values. Think of them as digital fingerprints of the malware files. We use standard algorithms like CEHv13 for this. These unique hash values can then be compared against vast online and offline malware databases, like VirusTotal. If the hash matches a known piece of malware, we immediately know what we're dealing with, or at least have a strong starting point. Tools like HashMyFiles can calculate these hashes easily.
So step one is basically asking, have we seen this exact file before?
Essentially, yes. It's the quickest win if it's known malware. Next, performing string search is often very revealing. This technique extracts any human-readable text strings that are embedded within the compiled binary code of the malware. These strings can often contain clues about the malware's functionality or intent, things like registry keys it interacts with, file names it looks for, URLs it might connect to, error messages, or even specific commands. Tools like Bintex are designed to pull these strings out effectively.
Like finding little notes the author left inside the code.
Sometimes, yeah, or just artifacts of the code itself. For Windows systems specifically, finding portable executables, PE, information is critical. The PE format is the standard structure for executable files, .exe, .dll, etc., on Windows. Analyzing the metadata within this PD structure can reveal a lot. The compilation date and time, functions the malware imports from system libraries, which hints at its capabilities, functions it might export for other modules to use, linked libraries, icons, menus, version information, and embedded strings we already mentioned. Tools like PEI can help identify if the file was packed or compiled with specific tools, and PE Explorer lets you dive deep into the metadata and resources.
So examining the file's birth certificate and structure.
A good way to put it. And a truly powerful technique for more advanced static analysis, especially for identifying families of malware or unknown variants, is using Yara rules. Yara is essentially a pattern matching language. It allows security analysts to create rules that describe specific characteristics of malware families, maybe sequences of bytes, specific text strings, structural properties, or combinations thereof. A Yara rule defines what patterns to search for within a file, and then sets a logical condition, like find string A and string B, or find this specific byte sequence, for determining if the rule matches. For instance, a rule named Silent Banker Variant 3 might look for specific hexadecimal byte patterns or unique text strings known to be associated with a particular banking Trojan family. Running these rules against suspicious files provides a very powerful way to classify and detect malware, even new variations.
Okay, so Yora lets you define your own custom signatures, essentially. That sounds powerful. Now, if static analysis is like carefully looking at the blueprint of a suspicious device, dynamic analysis is more like switching it on but inside a bomb disposal container, right? Watching what it actually does in a safe, controlled environment. What exactly are we looking for when malware is active?
That's a great analogy. Dynamic analysis gives us those crucial behavioral insights that static analysis often can't reveal just from looking at the code. We execute the malware, as you said, in carefully isolated environments like virtual machines, VMs, or dedicated sandbox systems, specifically designed to contain it and prevent it from spreading or causing real harm. Then we use various monitoring tools to capture its every move in detail.
What kinds of moves are we watching?
We perform port monitoring. We know malware often needs to communicate, maybe connecting back to its command and control C2 server, downloading more components, or exfiltrating stolen data. It often opens specific system I/O ports to do this. These open listening ports can also indicate backdoors waiting for incoming connections. Tools like the command line netstat, using flags like McCann shows all active connections and listening ports, or GUI tools like TCP view, which gives detailed real-time listings of TCP and UDP endpoints showing which process opened which connection, help us spot this suspicious network activity.
Watching the phone lines it tries to use.
Exactly. Process monitoring is also absolutely critical. Malware often starts new processes, injects code into legitimate existing processes, or takes over system processes to hide itself. We need to monitor things like what new processes are created, especially child processes spawned by others, what files or registry keys they access, their handles, what libraries, DLLs they load, and the overall execution flow. Malicious processes might even try to appear legitimate, maybe mimicking system process names to bypass simple firewall rules. The process monitor tool from CEHv13 internals is incredibly powerful here. It provides real-time logging of file system activity, registry access, and process thread creation and termination, capturing immense detail.
Okay, tracking every little thing it starts up or touches.
Pretty much. Registry monitoring is closely related. The Windows registry stores all sorts of OS and program configuration settings. Malware frequently abuses the registry to achieve persistence. It creates or modifies specific registry keys so that its code automatically runs every time the system boots up. Tools like CEHv13 power tools, or even just watching specific run keys in the registry can help examine the changes malware makes. Similarly, startup programs monitoring is vital. Malware often alters system settings to add itself to the standard Windows startup folders or registry locations to ensure it runs automatically after a reboot. The Auto Runs for Windows tool, also from CEHv13 internals, is excellent for this. It shows you everything configured to run automatically at boot or login, much more than the standard Task Manager startup tab.
Finding all the hidden ways it tries to stick around.
Exactly. And finally, network traffic monitoring and analysis at a deeper level is key. We need to watch for malware actually connecting out to those C2 servers, downloading suspicious files from malicious websites, or maybe making unusual DNS requests. Tools like SolarWinds NetFlow Traffic Analyzer can collect and correlate network flow data to spot anomalies, and the indispensable Wireshark lets you capture and dissect raw network packets in real time, filtering for specific IPs, ports, or protocols associated with C2 communication. These tools are critical for understanding how the malware communicates externally and what data it might be sending or receiving.
That's an incredibly extensive toolkit for both passive blueprint reading and active detonation chamber observation. It's really clear that ethical hackers need to be meticulous digital detectives. But okay, beyond just detection and analysis, what's our armor? How do we actually protect ourselves and our systems from all these varied threats we've discussed?
Defense, as always in cybersecurity, has to be multi-layered. There's no single silver bullet solution that stops everything. It's about combining multiple strategies. Let's start with some general malware countermeasures, good security hygiene, really. Be incredibly cautious about opening email attachments or clicking links, especially from unknown or unexpected senders. Phishing is still a primary vector. Inside a network, monitor internal traffic for odd ports being used or large amounts of encrypted traffic going to unusual destinations. Avoid downloading and executing applications from untrusted sources. Stick to official app stores or vendor websites. Install security patches and updates for your operating system and all your applications promptly and regularly. Vulnerability exploitation is huge.
Patch.
Always. Restrict user permissions where possible. Users shouldn't run as administrators for daily tasks if it can be avoided. This limits the damage malware can do if it does get executed. Run reputable host-based security software, antivirus, a firewall, maybe even host-based intrusion detection. Keep it updated. Regularly maintain data backups and test restoring them. This is your safety net against ransomware especially. Implement strong authentication, like two-factor authentication, 2FA, or multi-factor authentication, MFA, particularly for critical accounts and systems.
That extra code from your phone.
Yep, makes a big difference. Run periodic full-system antivirus scans, and again, keep that antivirus software constantly updated with the latest definitions. Now, for more targeted threats like APT countermeasures, we need to layer on more strategic defenses. Employ a zero-trust security model. Don't automatically trust anyone or anything just because it's inside your network perimeter. Verify explicitly.
Assume breach, verify everything.
That's the mindset. Segment the network into different zones with strict controls between them. This limits an APT's ability to move laterally if they compromise one segment. Encrypt sensitive data, both when it's stored at rest and when it's being transmitted in transit. Implement data loss prevention, DLP, controls, and data classification policies to monitor and protect sensitive information from leaving the network. Continuously gather and integrate threat intelligence to understand the specific APT actors and techniques targeting your industry or organization. And quickly, for adware countermeasures, since it's so common, use ad-blocking browser extensions. They're quite effective. Be very careful when installing software. Read the end-user license agreements, ULAs, and look closely at installation screens. Always choose custom or advanced installation options if available so you can deselect any bundled adware or potentially unwanted programs, PUPs.
Don't just click next, finish.
Please don't. Adjust your web browser's privacy and security settings to reduce tracking and block third-party cookies where possible. Regularly review the list of installed programs on your computer and remove anything you don't recognize or no longer need.
It's truly a multi-pronged defense we need, isn't it? Combining user vigilance, technical controls, and smart architecture. It really highlights how strong defense isn't just one thing, but this constant combination of awareness and technology. What about specific anti-malware software, though, and maybe specialized tools for those really tricky things like fileless threats?
Exactly. A layered approach is absolutely key, and that definitely includes deploying dedicated security software and increasingly more advanced detection systems. For general anti-malware software, the kind most people are familiar with, the best practice is always to install a reputable, up-to-date version and ensure it updates its virus definitions automatically and frequently, ideally multiple times a day. Vendors are constantly adding detection for new threats. Examples include well-known names like Avast, McAfee Total Protection, Bitdefender, Malwarebytes, ESET, Kaspersky, Norton 360, and many others. These are your essential frontline defenses against known threats.
Okay, the standard AV tools.
Right. But for those stealthier threats like fileless malware, we need more advanced capabilities. There are specific fileless malware protection tools emerging. For instance, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is part of Microsoft's Enterprise Security Suite, is designed specifically to tackle these. It uses behavioral analysis, machine learning models trained to spot anomalies indicative of fileless attacks, and it leverages a Windows feature called the Anti-Malware Scan Interface, AMSI.
AMSI, what's that?
AMSI allows applications and scripts, like PowerShell, to integrate directly with the installed antivirus engine. So even if malicious code is running purely in memory from a script, AMSI can pass that code to the antivirus engine for inspection before it fully executes. This provides much better visibility into script-based and fileless attacks. It's designed to spot the malicious behavior or code in memory, not just look for a file on disk.
Intercepting it mid-flight almost.
That's a good way to think about it. And finally, for really comprehensive protection, especially in enterprise environments, we look to endpoint detection and response, EDR, and extended detection and response, XDR tools. These platforms go far beyond traditional antivirus. They provide continuous monitoring of endpoints, computers, servers, mobile devices, advanced threat detection using techniques like machine learning and behavioral analysis, and automated investigation and response capabilities. EDR focuses primarily on securing the endpoints themselves. XDR takes it a step further by extending that detection and response capability across multiple security layers, integrating data from endpoints, network traffic analysis, email security gateways, cloud security tools, etc., to provide a much broader, more correlated view of potential attacks unfolding across the entire environment.
Seeing the bigger picture of an attack?
Exactly. Examples of leading EDR/XDR platforms include tools like CrowdStrike Falcon Insight XDR, which heavily utilizes AI and integrated threat intelligence, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which has strong EDR/XDR capabilities, Tanium, Cisco XDR, Trellix, VMware, Carbon Black, and others. These advanced platforms provide the deep visibility, sophisticated analytics, and often automated response actions needed to effectively combat today's complex and evasive threats, including fileless malware and potentially even nascent AI-driven attacks. #recap.
Wow, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground today, seriously. From mapping out those stealthy entry points malware uses to exploring the sophisticated, even AI-driven attacks we're starting to see, and then diving deep into the critical analysis techniques and countermeasures defenders use has been an incredible deep dive.
Indeed, it has. We've really explored the core concepts of malware, making sure to differentiate between, the deceptive Trojan, the self-replicating virus, and the independently self-propagating worm. We also highlighted that crucial evolution into more advanced threats, like those long-term advanced persistent threats, or APTs, the ghost in the machine that is fileless malware leaving no trace on disk, and that emerging, very concerning frontier of AI-based malware. Understanding their unique attack vectors from classic social engineering via instant messengers and decoy applications to exploiting system misconfigurations and the intricate processes behind sophisticated campaigns like fake GPT or Pylus, it's all paramount for defense.
Absolutely. And we didn't just stop at understanding the threats, did we? We really delved into the ethical hacker's toolkit, that arsenal of defense. We look at the meticulous process of static analysis, dissecting code, fingerprinting files, searching strings, analyzing PE structures using EIR rules, and then we explored the crucial insights gained from dynamic analysis, safely observing malware's actual behavior in controlled environments by monitoring ports, processes, registry changes, and network traffic. Knowing these techniques really empowers defenders to identify even the most elusive threats.
Critically, yes. And then we outline the comprehensive, multi-layered defense strategy. It encompasses those essential general best practices like rigorous patching, strong authentication, careful email handling, and backups, but also specialized countermeasures for APTs and adware, and the vital role of deploying advanced security software, modern anti-malware, specialized fileless detection, and those powerful EDR and XDR solutions. I think the key takeaway here really is that security isn't about buying a single tool or flipping a single switch. It's a continuous layered process of vigilance, technology, and adaptation, constantly needing to evolve as the threats themselves inevitably do. #tag outro.
Definitely a continuous battle. As we wrap up this deep dive, here's maybe a final thought to carry with you.
Yeah, consider this. The adversarial landscape, as we've seen, is constantly shifting. Malware is becoming more sophisticated, more autonomous, increasingly harder to detect using old methods. Given this relentless evolution, particularly towards things like fileless techniques and AI-driven adaptation, how might the role of the ethical hacker, the defender, need to transform fundamentally to stay ahead? How do we move beyond just reacting to known threats and start truly predicting and perhaps even preempting the unknown threats that are just over the horizon?
That's a really powerful question to ponder. How do we get ahead of the curve? Your vigilance, your curiosity, and your commitment to continuous learning are undoubtedly your greatest assets in this ongoing cyber battle. We sincerely hope this deep dive has given you valuable insights and practical tools to help you in that fight. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and we'll see you next time on the deep dive.